I knew it. You finally showed your true colors.
Yes, I took all of it.
Yes, I took all of it. The moment those words left her mouth, the air in the bedroom froze solid. In that room where only the thin hiss of an oxygen machine remained, the dry fingertips of the old woman on the bed trembled faintly. Maya saw that tremor clearly, yet she never once turned her head away. The missing money came to $700,000. Enough. Enough to turn the Han family's Bel Air mansion upside down. That night, not a single relative gathered in the White Estate's living room doubted her confession. And why would they? The woman who had stayed closest to the dying matriarch was her, after all. In the middle of the family stood a gray-haired man, arms crossed, looking down at Maya. Was Kang Man-ho, the uncle who'd been itching to get his hands on his dying sister-in-law's fortune. I knew it. You finally showed your true colors. One corner of his mouth curled upward. How could a man wear such a satisfied face while condemning another soul? Maya thought she'd never forget that expression as long as she lived. That day, she packed her bags and left the house without a single word in her defense. 3 years passed after that. When November came around again, a woman stood before the iron gate of that Bel Air mansion. The morning sun scattered in tiny pieces across her round, curly hair, and in her hand she held a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. It was Maya, the very woman who, 3 years ago, had been branded a thief and thrown out of this house. Today was the memorial day of the late matriarch Han Jong-suk. She gazed up at the tightly shut iron gate for a long, long while. The only thing different from 3 years ago was the ivy, grown a hand's width taller. Maya hugged the bouquet tight against her chest. I came to keep my promise to you, ma'am. How long can a promise to the dead hold a living soul in its grip? She hesitated for a moment before the doorbell and bit down once on her dry lips. Then slowly, ever so slowly, she raised her hand. Not long after the doorbell rang, the iron gate swung open. A man in a black suit strode out. Kang Do-yoon, the only son of Han Jong-suk, the man who'd spent 3 years sharpening his hatred for her like a blade. The instant he saw Maya's face, he stopped in his tracks, and for a heartbeat his eyes wavered hard. But that flicker quickly hardened into cold fury. What makes you think you can set foot here again? Instead of answering, Maya quietly held out the bouquet. You think you get to lay flowers at my mother's altar with those hands? 3 years of unswallowed resentment dripped from his voice. To Do-yoon, Maya was a hypocrite who'd pretended to nurse his dying mother while siphoning off the family's money. The person his mother trusted most in her final days, and therefore the one who'd betrayed her deepest. That's what he'd believed all this time, wasn't it? Do-yoon, just give me 10 minutes. Her voice was low, but it didn't shake. After that night 3 years ago, Maya's life had collapsed to the ground. Her caregiver's license was revoked, and word that she was a thief spread like wildfire through the Korean-American community. A woman who lost her job, lost her tiny rented room, and in the end, lost even her own name. Even scraping by washing dishes at a diner, she never once cried out that she was innocent. People took that very silence as proof she'd admitted her guilt. But Maya's silence carried a different kind of weight. Not yet. Not until that child is safe. The reason she kept her mouth shut through all those vicious rumors had one name at its very center. Jia. A name no one in the world knew. The name Han Jong-suk never let go of until her last breath. Maya had held the dying matriarch's hand and made a single promise, and she'd carried that promise like her own flesh for 3 years. There was a reason Maya stood before this gate again. A few days earlier, a faded letter had arrived addressed to her. The sender was Han Jong-suk, who'd passed away 3 years ago, yet the postmark was dated this year. A letter sent by a dead woman. How often does a thing like that happen in this world? Inside the envelope, only a single line was written. It's time to tell Do-yoon now. The night she read that one line, Maya cried for the first time in a long, long while. 10 minutes. 1 minute. I've got nothing to say to you. He turned his back coldly, and the heavy iron gate began to swing shut again. Right then, Maya quietly tossed one line at his back. Your mother. Mother, that money wasn't stolen from her. Those words struck his back like an invisible blade. Do-yoon's feet froze in place as if nailed to the ground. He turned around slowly, and the two of them locked eyes across the empty air. What are you talking about? Maya didn't answer. She only drew that faded letter from inside her coat. Recognizing his mother's handwriting, Do-yoon's face drained white in an instant. For the first time, a thin crack ran through the certainty that had stood rock solid in him for 3 years. And so the first dawn of a buried truth, awakening, broke on the dry November wind. Do-yoon stood frozen for a long while, clutching the letter written in his mother's hand. The familiar round letters, even that habit of the strokes trailing off at the end. It was unmistakably hers. What is this supposed to mean? A door of memory he thought was locked dragged him back to that season 3 years ago, the one he'd worked so hard to avoid. Back to a late summer day when a woman named Maya first set foot in this house. That year, Han Jung-suk had already been given a terminal diagnosis. The family kept it hushed, but everyone in the mansion knew the matriarch didn't have much time left. Maya came into the house as a hospice caregiver. Unfamiliar skin, an unfamiliar accent, unfamiliar curls. In that grand Bel Air mansion, she was an outsider to anyone's eyes. The housekeepers side-eyed her, and the relatives made their displeasure plain. Han Jung-suk too didn't let Maya in at first. I don't want to leave my final days to someone like you. The proud old woman's words were sharp as thorns. But Maya didn't get angry. She simply brewed warm barley tea at the same hour each day and set it by the bedside. The human heart crumbles sooner to daily warmth than to harsh words, doesn't it? A week passed. Then 2. One dawn, Maya rubbed Jung-suk's back for a long while as the pain kept her from sleep. That day, for the first time, the old woman didn't push the outsider's hand away. Your hands, they're so warm. It was a short remark, but Maya kept it close for the rest of her life. And so, between those two women, something thicker than blood slowly began to grow. There was one thing Jung-suk showed only to Maya, an old letterbox hidden deep beneath the bed, its mother-of-pearl inlay chipped away here and there. What's inside this is the sin of my whole life and my last conscience. Maya didn't look inside. She didn't even ask. She only quietly wiped away the moisture welling in the old woman's eyes. What storm that letterbox would someday stir up? No one could have known back then. Meanwhile, another shadow was creeping through the mansion. The deeper his sister-in-law's illness ran, the more often Uncle Kang Man-ho came around. Jung-suk, I'll take care of sorting out the company shares, you just put your stamp on it. Using sickbed visits as an excuse, he brought stacks of documents and kept badgering his weakened sister-in-law. Her only son, Do-yoon, was shuttling between New York and LA for work. Work around then, often away from his mother's side. The hungriest gather closest to the weakest. That's no different now than it ever was. 15 days before she passed, Jung-suk gripped Maya's hand tight. Maya, I have one favor to ask. Can you do it for me? Her voice carried a desperation she'd never shown a soul in all her life. Jung-suk spoke the name of a child and asked Maya to protect that child to the very end. Maya nodded, even without fully understanding why. Before the eyes of someone dying, how could she ever shake that hand off? And then that fateful night arrived. It came out that the family's emergency fund, $700,000, had vanished entirely. The money had quietly slipped out of the account just before Jung-suk passed. Man-ho laid out the fact before the family as if he'd been waiting for it. Who else would have done it but that woman who wormed her way into this house? The arrows of suspicion all rained down on Maya at once. That night, Jung-suk summoned Maya to her bedside with the last of her strength. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Unable to get the words out, the old woman wrapped Maya's hand in her own trembling one. The plea held inside that tremor, Maya understood it without a single word. What would shatter the moment the truth came out was Jung-suk's final honor and that child's future. I'll carry it. Rest easy, ma'am. Do-yoon, who rushed back days later, lost his mind at the news that his mother had been betrayed. He stepped toward Maya as if he might grab her by the collar. What kind of person robs a dying woman blind? Maya never offered a word in her defense. To Do-yoon, her silence sounded like the surest confession. Get out. Don't you ever come near my mother again. Maya took a single worn bag and left that mansion. The sound of the iron gate closing behind her lingered in her ears for a long time. And 3 days later, Han Jong-suk finally closed her eyes. The dead don't speak, and the living hardened their misunderstanding into truth. And so a story everyone thought was buried was about to wake again. 3 years on. Where's that letterbox now? And the child Jung-suk tried to protect to the very end? Is she safe? The gate that was about to close swung open again, all because of one letter in Do-yoon's hand. He let Maya into the living room, yet still wouldn't meet her eyes. Stepping onto that hardwood floor again after 3 years, Maya remembered the familiar smell of barley tea. You've got 5 minutes. Start by explaining what that letter is. His voice was still cold, but somewhere it had cracked, ever so slightly. Maya drew a deep breath, and for the first time, spoke the words she'd buried in her chest for 3 years. That money, your mother sent it herself. Once again, the air in the living room froze. Do-yoon's pupils shook, and the teacup in his hand rattled against its saucer. Are you really dragging my dead mother into this? But beneath that retort, fear ran far thicker than anger. Do-yoon shot up from his seat and walked to the window. His mother? Siphoning off the money herself? The mother he'd known his whole life was not that kind of person. It's a lie. There's no way. Yet in one corner of his mind surfaced his mother's lips, forever trying to tell him something in her final moments. People remember only what they want to believe, and when that memory shakes, that's when they're most afraid, isn't it? For a long while, Do-yoon couldn't say a thing. You have proof of where that money went? Maya nodded, but she didn't open her mouth right away. It wasn't yet time to tell everything. A child's safety hung on it, after all. There's someone your mother tried to protect, to the end. That person has to be safe first. Unable to gauge the weight of those words, Do-yoon furrowed his brow. Still, he could feel one thing, that the look in Maya's eyes was not the look of someone telling a lie. Just then, heavy footsteps came from the entryway. A man with gray hair slicked smoothly back. Kang Man-ho had walked in. The instant he recognized Maya, his face twisted. How did this woman crawl back in here again? The same contempt as that day 3 years ago rode every word out of his mouth. Inside the letterbox were several wire transfer receipts and the faded photo of a young girl. The name of the recipient stamped on the receipts was one Do-yoon had never heard before. The girl in the photo looked maybe 15 or 16, and something about her eyes was strangely familiar. Who on earth is this child? The trace of his mother sending money to someone, faithfully, month after month, unfolded right before his eyes. It hadn't been siphoned off. It had been sent. The next morning, an urgent phone call came to Maya. It was from the orphanage Maya had secretly looked after for 3 years. Some unfamiliar men had come asking about the whereabouts of a child named Gia and left. They've already started moving. A cold chill ran straight down her spine. Once the buried truth woke, the hands trying to bury it again began to move right along with it. Maya raced straight to the mansion and poured out all of her urgency to Do-yoon. We have to find that child first. She could be in danger right now. Recalling the photo from the letterbox, Do-yoon's face hardened. The child his mother tried to protect. The child Man-ho was hunting. And the child Maya had hidden for 3 years were all one and the same person. The two of them bolted for the front door, neither waiting on the other. But by the time they reached the orphanage, Gia's room was empty. 장면 3:11. 중간 해설. Now, take a look at this. See how one person's silence swallowed 3 whole years? Through today's eyes, Maya's choice might look foolish, but some people choose to protect a person before the truth. Whether her heart was right or wrong, that will only become clear at the very end of this story. Gia's room sat empty, only a small bag gone. On the desk lay an open notebook and a half-finished glass of milk. Traces of a hurried exit, as if she'd been chased out, were left all over the room. Please, let me not be too late. Maya's fingertips went cold. The orphanage director recounted what had happened in a trembling voice. Those men said an uncle of hers had sent them. Do-yoon's face hardened like stone. At that single word, uncle, the scattered pieces began to lock together all at once. No way. The uncle? He grabbed Maya's arm and bolted for the car. Where the two of them arrived was a remote villa Man-ho owned. In the middle of the living room, a terrified girl sat curled at the edge of the couch. It was Gia. a little more grown than the photo in the letterbox, a child whose eyes looked exactly like Jung Suk's. Just sign the papers quietly, and nothing will happen to you. He was shoving a single sheet of paper at the girl. That document was a statement giving up every right Jia had. A paper demanding she set down everything the inheritance Jung Suk left her, and her place as family by blood. No, my aunt left this to me. The girl's voice trembled, but inside it was a firmness that resembled Jung Suk's. It was the moment Manho's hand reached to seize the girl's thin arm roughly. "Take your hands off her, uncle." At Do-yoon's entrance, bursting through the door, Manho's face twisted. "Do-yoon, this doesn't concern you. Stay out of family business. Why don't you start by telling me who this child is?" Manho was lost for words for a moment, then tried to smooth it over with a sly smile. But nothing is as precarious as a smile trying to cover a lie. Just then, Maya stepped forward. In her hands were the letterbox and the transfer receipts Do-yoon had found. This child is Jung Suk's own niece, the daughter of the younger sister this family cast out. A heavy silence settled over the living room. The bloodline Manho had spent his whole life treating as non-existent, trying to erase, was this very girl. Your mother sent money every month to repay that debt. It wasn't a crime. It was her conscience. The $700,000 Jung Suk supposedly stole had flowed into the tuition and living costs of an abandoned niece. Yet Manho disguised that flow of money as embezzlement. Seizing on his sister-in-law's death, he siphoned off even the company funds and pinned every crime on an easy target, the caregiver. Maya's 3 years of silence had been the time spent protecting this very truth. "You're framing someone with baseless nonsense," he shouted, veins bulging. But the look in Maya's eyes didn't waver. "The thief you've been hunting so hard is in the mirror." That single line sliced through the air of the living room in one stroke. It was the moment a man who'd spent his whole life branding others as thieves faced his own face for the first time. Do-yoon drew a thick envelope of documents from inside his coat. Inside was the trail of company funds he'd chased all night, riding his accountant hard the evening before. "The money funneled into your shell accounts alone comes to $3 million, uncle." The color started draining from Manho's face. Once the dam of lies broke, the truth he'd held back came pouring down like a violent current. Do-yoon walked slowly over to Jia and wrapped his arm around the trembling girl's shoulders. "It's okay now. Nobody can touch you." For the first time in 3 years, warmth, rather than anger, colored his voice. He turned to look at Maya, and his eyes were full of an apology he couldn't put into words. Only then did he realize that the woman he'd hated for 3 years was the one who'd shouldered his mother's final dignity all alone. In the distance, the wail of police sirens was drawing closer to the villa. Manho sat slumped, staring into empty space, as everything he'd tried so hard to grasp slipped through his fingers. The sins a person stacks up end up striking their own feet in the end, don't they? Do-yoon tried with trembling hands to say something to Maya, but his lips only quivered, never becoming sound. The door between the two of them, sealed tight for 3 years, was at last beginning to crack open, little by little. That night, Manho was handed over to the police on charges of embezzlement and unlawful confinement. The trail of the shell accounts was so clear that there was nowhere for him to slip away to. The final image of a man who'd played the family elder his whole life was that of an old man, head bowed, trying to hide his cuffed hands. The fortune, the honor he'd tried so hard to seize in the end, not a single handful of it remained in his grip. Within days, the truth spread to every corner of the Korean-American community. The story that the woman branded a thief had actually been the one who kept a dying matriarch's final promise. Neighbors who had once turned their backs on Maya now bowed their heads before her name. But Maya herself was unmoved by all the fuss. Name or no name, as long as that child is safe, that's enough. On an afternoon when Jung Suk's Memorial Day came around again, Do-yoon came to find Maya. The man who always stood so rigid couldn't get a word out this time, standing there for the longest while. "After hating you for 3 years, I don't even know how I can face you to apologize." And then he slowly bowed his head before Maya. That deep bow from a man wound tight with pride landed heavier than any excuse. Maya drew yet another letter from her bag and held it out to Do-yoon. It was the last letter Jung Suk had left for Maya alone before she passed. As he opened the envelope with trembling hands, his mother's writing pressed into his eyes, one word at a time. Do-yoon, the one you should hate isn't Maya. Her only crime was granting my last request. At the end of the letter, a grown man's shoulders shook like a little child's. Jia, meanwhile, held Maya's hand and would hardly let go. I know now that you protected me for 3 whole years. The girl's eyes reddened, and Maya gently patted her small back. Those distant footsteps watching over her from beyond the orphanage wall had, in truth, been a promise kept toward this child. The favor Jung-suk had asked of Maya was kept, and not in vain. Do-yoon decided to bring Jia into his own home.
You're not alone anymore.
We're family, you and me. It was the moment a girl who'd been erased from the bloodline her whole life finally walked in under the name of a family. Jung-suk's last conscience, the one she'd so longed to protect, had at last found its rightful place, hadn't it? A child's laughter spread through the dry living room of the mansion for the first time in ages. As time passed, Maya's daily life slowly found its way back too. The caregiver's license that had been stripped from her was restored, and she began again the work of staying beside someone in their final days. She'd won back the name she'd lost, yet Maya didn't gloat in the slightest. What she truly reclaimed wasn't her honor, but the peace of mind of having kept her promise to one person, to the very end. Do-yoon began checking in on Maya more and more. At first it came from a place of apology, but before long, it had taken on a different color. I think I finally understand why my mother trusted you the way she did. Instead of answering, Maya smiled faintly, and the late afternoon sun stretched long between the two of them. Who could have guessed that a bond born of hatred would drift toward a place like this? That autumn, the 3 of them visited Jung-suk's grave together. In Maya's hands, as always, was a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. Do-yoon and Jia stood side by side before the headstone and bowed their heads for a long while. I kept my promise. All of it. Rest easy now. A dry wind brushed over the headstone, and a single chrysanthemum petal swayed lightly. It was a scene from that autumn, the moment a buried truth finally walked out into the light. Some people protect others by crying out the truth, and others by holding their silence close. The path Maya chose was slow and lonely, but in the end, it set the most precious things back where they belonged. Doesn't this small reconciliation, blooming at the end of hatred, leave a quiet echo in our hearts today? What is it this story means to tell us? A sincere heart, however, deeply buried under the soil of misunderstanding, never loses its light in the end. And the sacrifice one person quietly endures only reveals its true weight once time has passed. And the hand that pulls others down to fill its own greed falls in the end into the very pit it dug. Isn't that the way of the world? Before we hate someone too easily, it's worth looking back, even once, at what story might be hidden behind their silence. What saves a person is not a loud voice, but a quiet heart that keeps its promise to the very end. This story is a work of fiction,